Hey, I'm Jeff Reber with ERA Heavener Realty, accompanied by Matt Miller of ERA, our property manager, and then Seth Rothstein. And we're so thankful to have Seth here with us today. He's an attorney and a partner with Adams, Rothstein, and Siegel. And Seth focuses on real estate and civil litigation, has a number of landlords that are clients. And Seth, I'm sure I'm missing something there. So fill in the details on what you do on a daily basis and why we're even having this conversation.
No, I think you did a great job at summarizing what I do. I help out people that are landlords, commercial landlords, and real property managers because they represent so much of the clients that I have. That has caused me to have to keep up with what's been going on since March with the pandemic. It's not business as usual, as you probably know. Starting in April, there were series of orders. And the thing that was so confusing for landlords, for my clients, was that the orders were coming from a series of different places. There was an order from Chief Judge Mahan. There were orders, a series of orders that came from Governor DeSantis. There was the CARES Act, and now there's the CDC order. All of those impact landlords' rights. And so almost on a daily basis, there's updates as to what can and can't be done. There's also been a lack of real information, a source of real information for landlords to go to. So this is something that you would just have to cobble together from different news sources if you didn't have somebody you could talk to about it.
Yeah, and so that's kind of our first topic here is we have different things happening at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. Like you just mentioned, we are a local real estate brokerage. And so we're talking to landlords, Duval, Clay, St. Johns County, maybe, Matt, do we have anything in Nassau County? I don't think we do.
No.
Anyways.
Maybe one in Flagler. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or the individual that has primarily residential, but maybe even some commercial property that's being rented out at present by a tenant. What does all this mean? What do I need to be worried about? What do I need to be not worried about that I may see in the news on a daily basis? Yeah, what does that mean?
The first thing you should know is that if you have commercial property, that none of the orders or acts that come out affect commercial property. Okay. So if you don't have, if you've got a commercial tenant who's not paying rent regularly, they should be posted with the appropriate notice. And you can go ahead and go to court and file the appropriate legal action for possession or for possession and damages if you want. And none of the current court orders would affect commercial property. Okay. One of the things that I think I see on a frequent basis is just misinformation on the part of the public. They may have read a news article saying that there's no more evictions till the end of the year. That's not true. So there is also another group of people who are not subject to any protection whatsoever under any of the acts. That would include people whose leases have come up, the lease is over, and they may be month-to-month tenants. If you terminated the month-to-month tenancy, or if their lease is just over and you have told them you're not renewing, you can file suit for that, and there is no protection on any of the orders for those people.
And that's on a residential situation. If I'm month to month, the landlord can, if for non-payment or any other reason, I guess, just non-renewal. Yes. Right. Okay.
And if it's non-renewal, none of the orders would protect those people.
Gotcha.
Also, if you had a tenant that was in non-compliance with the lease by creating loud disturbances, selling drugs on the property, using drugs on the property, I had one with people who were keeping furniture and other kind of things in the yard, disturbing the neighbors. Any of those, I've had those go through within the last few weeks. Those are what's called for-cause evictions, unauthorized pets. All of those cases, no matter what happens with those people, none of those people pick up any protection from any of the COVID orders that have come out.
Interesting. And another thing, Matt, I think you were going to mention this. The CDC, they had fill in the details, Matt, what your question was for Seth about how that plays into our moving tenants out, moving tenants in, et cetera.
Correct. And Seth and I had talked about this kind of off the show a little bit. And it was one of those, like the CDC released a 41-page document. And it's like, wait, hold on. The CDC, it's not a governing body in the state of Florida. That's not a governing body over HUD. That's not like, I guess explain to me how that came about, because that to me was kind of shocking when I saw at length, the length of this document, everything that it covered. And kind of go through, and Seth knows more about it than I do, obviously. But go through kind of the highlights of what's going on with that. I know they have to fill some stuff out. They have to be in good standing. There's a lot of things that go into it. So it's very kind of confusing in my opinion. But if Seth can outline that, that'd be great.
Well, this is, I'm glad you asked. This is the newest order that's come out that's affected landlords. And it stems from the CARES Act, which originally started in about March 27th, and it ran through the end of July. It protected tenants who were in properties as renters where the owners had a mortgage with Fannie or Freddie. If they were HUD tenants, VA tenants, any of those, then you could not evict during COVID. And also the landlords themselves could ask for relief from their lender, saying that they'd experienced hardship as a result of COVID. So there was provision there for the tenants and provision there for the landlords. That expired. And when that expired, it kind of created a firestorm in the news across the country, not just in Florida, where they said, we're now going to be facing a ton of people who are just going to be put out on the street, homelessness and evictions. We need immediate action. And Donald Trump issued an executive order saying, I'm going to instruct the CDC to look into and try to determine whether a ban on evictions would be helpful and whether that's something that would help fight COVID. And he gave them that authority. Within the last 4 days or so, the COVID order has been published. Once again, what it says is that it provides protection to some people. So if the tenant wants protection, it requires that the tenant fill out a declaration under penalty of perjury. And it says essentially that you've got to give a copy of the declaration to the landlord, and you have to swear that the following things are true. One, that you've used your best efforts to obtain all available government assistance for renter housing. Two, that you either expect to earn no more than $99,000 in annual income. Three, that you're unable to make your full rent payment or make a full housing payment due to substantial loss of household income, loss of compensable hours of work or wages, layoffs, or extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. Next, that you're using your best efforts to make timely partial payments that are as close to the full payment as the individual circumstances may permit, taking into account other non-discretionary expenses. I really think that this is maybe the biggest thing in the sworn declaration. Just so you know, the landlords that I've talked to, about 70 to 80% have been getting paid their full rent, with about 20 to 30% not paying during this. So if you want to qualify under this, you've got to show that you've been making partial payments
to pay. Yeah.
and you're doing this under the penalty of perjury. So what I'm seeing is mostly people that are paying everything or people that are paying nothing. But I'm not seeing a lot of people that are doing their best to make partial payments and just are coming a little bit short. The landlords that I know are working with those people. They're not filing evictions. Next, it says they have to swear that they're using their best efforts to make the timely partial payments, and that if evicted, that they would become homeless, need to move into a homeless shelter, or need to move in a new residence shared by other people who live in close quarters because they have no other available housing options. And finally, it says that they understand that they still have to pay rent, and that none of this excuses them from any of the rent payment, and that this they further acknowledge and understand that this temporary halt and relief for them, the people that could honestly sign off on this, that would end on December 31st, and then possession would be given to the landlords again.
So then clear up a common misnomer for us. Tenants are still obligated to pay rent per their lease.
Right.
Unless they knock off or check all of those boxes on extenuating circumstances, because we've had that misconception. We're like, no, you still have to pay your rent. Is that an accurate statement?
Right. Without getting too legal or technical, what this is called force majeure. If you were talking about any other type of real estate deal, force majeure is a uncontrollable force, and it says in a contractual relationship when there is something that is catastrophic and unexpected, like a riot, terrorist attack, a pandemic, something like that, that would prevent you from performing. What it means is that you are excused from performing during the time of that great emergency, and then you're required to comply with the contract immediately after that time period passes. That's exactly the way this has been set up by the government. They're saying you're excused. If you fall into this category, you may be excused from making payment during that time or being removed during that time. But when it is over, all of it is owed.
Yeah. Okay. No,
So it sounds to me like that's very few people. And, probably like and one thing I was going to ask Seth as far as that's concerned is, what's the amount of time? So let's say a tenant, pays 3 months ago and they haven't paid anything. And you're like, okay, so now you're at 3 months past, but they made a partial payment in 2 months later. Like, it sounds like there's some gray area, I guess, in there. And I'm assuming does that kind of clear up? Like,
that's when we say, hey, call Seth. He'll give you
advice.
advice.
Like how long do they have to not pay? Or like how much is a partial payment? I know it says the most they possibly can. Like obviously the judge decides that.
I think that's a great question. Yeah. And I think it opens up another avenue, which is you're talking about a tenant that is working with you, not somebody who's not paying at all. For a tenant that's working with you, I think that you've got a lot of different tools at your disposal, short of coming to me. Of course, if you came to me and we filed a case for possession, that can always result in us working a deal out with the tenant, and then me preparing something called an order adopting stipulation, which is an agreement between the parties that's signed off on by the judge that says that they're going to repay that rent over a certain period of time, that if they do, that they'll remain tenants, and if they don't, that you're entitled to immediate possession. That way, if they default on their agreement, you don't have to start things over, give another notice, or waste any future time on it. So the gold standard for me is if somebody hasn't paid and you've got problems communicating with them or getting timely payments, then we can always go to court and get that structured in the form of a court order. If you are successful working with the people, I think you could restructure the rent for a period of time and bump up the rent to help recapture some lost rent. You could build in a couple extra payments. There's lots of different things that you could do to help catch up on the balance. If the people aren't really working with you and you've accepted partial payments, then it would be a 3-day notice and then file the lawsuit. And then if they want to work things out, then they could reach out to us during the time period where the litigation is going on, and we could work something out and create something like that order adopting stipulation I was talking about.
Okay.
So from your perspective, Seth, just with everything that you've seen and what's going on, where do you see the end in sight for things getting somewhat back to normal? That's part one of the question. And then part two of the question is just, as an owner of residential real estate in Northeast Florida, how do I stay ahead of the curve on this? How do I make sure that I'm being proactive, doing everything that I need to do, paying attention to the proper sources for information? So end in sight, what does that look like? And how do I do right now what my part would be if I own real estate to make sure that I'm staying on top of things?
So let me take the first part of the question first, which is when can we expect things to go back to normal?
Right.
I would tell you that things in the legal world are paralleling what you're seeing in the outside world. So what we're seeing now is just like schools are back and open, the governor signed an order on his eviction moratorium on August 1st. From March through August, he told any cause of action for possession, meaning you could not go to court and file a case for eviction if it was for non-payment of rent.
Right.
He said on August 1st that he'd extended his protection. However, when the lawyers read the order, the language in the order had changed. And now it no longer said that it was tolling any cause of action, but it said that the plaintiff couldn't be put into possession. And so if you're a lawyer and technical, you understand that that just means that they just allowed you to go back to court, file 3-day notices, file your case, work through the legal system, get a final judgment. The only thing that you can't do is execute on the writ of possession until they say the October 1st right now. And then just like the CDC order, it says that if you don't want to be put out on the street, you affirmatively have to say that you've been impacted by COVID, that you've either had your income reduced or somebody in the family's gotten sick. So not everybody gets a pass on that. So a lot of people, I think, thought when he made his announcement that he had renewed the eviction protections, that everything was the same. It was so confusing to people that it actually took 4 days of lawyers arguing with the clerk of court to get them to admit and to accept that they were now supposed to start processing eviction complaints. They didn't believe it until the lawyers came back to them with the order and said, look at the order, the language has changed. So
Attorneys love a good technicality, and me too. Yeah, catching a technicality is an important thing.
It runs to the second question that you have, which is what can landlords do to protect themselves? Sure. So traditionally, what I would tell you is you need to vet your tenants the right way. You need to have a good lease. You need to have a 1-month security deposit. And the first time that somebody doesn't pay you rent, you've got to do, even if it's partial payment, you've got to do a 3-day notice. If they don't come up with all the rent, you need to go ahead and file for possession. That's how you protect yourself, by not letting the horses out of the barn, not letting the toothpaste out of the tube. It's a Humpty Dumpty situation that once you've lost the money, you're never getting it back, which is something that the legislature and the governor doesn't understand. They say it's still owed, you're still gonna, we'll just make them pay it later. But the truth of the matter is this, it boils down to math, like Moneyball. So most tenants come in and have to pay 1 month rent and a security deposit. If the rent is $1,000 a month, the monetary value and break point on that is $2,000. The minute that that tenant gets into you for more than $2,000, you're never going to get any of your money. They're just going to move and pay $2,000 to go somewhere else. If they owed you $4,000, they just got over on you $2,000.
Yeah, they're already, to use a poker term, pot committed on going somewhere else. They have more chips stacked going elsewhere than they do to stay put. So yeah.
That's exactly right. So the best thing that you can do is that if your tenant hasn't paid and you're getting into that situation where you could be losing money, you need to go to court as soon as possible. That's what was so terrible about them taking away our ability to go to court from April through August. But the good news for everybody is you can go to court now. There may be a problem with putting them out on the street at the very end due to the governor's order or due to the CDC order. But we are getting closer and closer to things going the way they normally do. Right now, the protection on putting them out on the street is set to expire in October. I don't know that I would be altogether surprised if they gave that part of it another month.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So I'll give you this final question, and we can wrap up from here. I'm sure you've got stuff to do this morning, but you had mentioned, what a landlord can do, and the fact that they had some of their maybe privileges, even rights, taken away. Do you see this snowballing into something where it's like landlords against the county, landlords against the state, landlords against the federal government? Anything like that falling down already from all of this? Is it? Okay. So
yeah,
what's
it's
that
happened already. So the first wave of lawsuits that came out, they don't come from people like me. They come from lawyers who represent large apartment complex owners and large property owners like that. The first cases that I saw that hit federal court, this was the CARES Act. And so there were 2 cases that were very interesting that came out recently. One was from California. In California, there were eviction restrictions, and then the municipalities, some of them got more restrictive with evictions than the state guidelines. And so some of the landlords banded together on that one and raised some constitutional issues on in other words, they said you're denying us access to courts. This is a constitutional taking without due process. All of that. I mean, there were several constitutional violations alleged. Then the same thing happened in New York in federal court, and the federal court there issued like a 49-page opinion that was very thorough. I suspect that any other cases along those lines are going to mirror that decision. That case, if anybody's interested, they can email me and I'll get them a copy of that. But the court says on that there's no constitutional problems, that they said that you couldn't go to court from March through August or the end of the year or whenever. Lawyers said that that's a violation, that it violates your access to courts. And the New York court said, you don't understand what denying you access to courts means. Denying you access to court means you don't ever get to go to court. We didn't deny you access to courts. We delayed your ability to go to court. And that's a totally different issue. You don't have a constitutional protection against a delay going to court. So they denied it on that grounds. Then the people said, hey, this is a taking without due process. You've taken our money. Then the court goes to that and says, hey, we've been doing our research and 70 to 80% of the landlords are getting all of their money. So how can you say it's a taking if you're getting your money? And then they wrap it up and say, if you didn't get paid, we say the money's still owed. So you can still go to court when the courts open back up and get your money. So we haven't taken anything from you.
But in the meantime, it's going to be hard times.
But let me tell you this. When I read the CDC order, I saw something that I considered to be a constitutional problem. And that is that they are requiring, if you want protection under the CDC order, you have to prove that you've been trying to make as close to full payments every month as you possibly can. Now, to me, that doesn't sound like it's rationally related to the spread of the disease. So if you said you've been around somebody who'd been tested positive for COVID, if you were running a fever, if you didn't feel good, any of that stuff, I could see why they said we can't put you out on the street. If you did, it could lead to the spread of the disease. But whether somebody's paid their rent or hasn't paid partial payment to the rent is not rationally related to the spread of the disease. So I could see some new lawyers filing suit in federal court saying that this is arbitrary and capricious and that the CDC order itself should be held and found unconstitutional. It's so brand new, only a few days old. There are no cases and no decisions on that, but I expect that we will see those.
We'll see some soon.
Yes.
Fun to watch with a bag of popcorn on the couch to see how all of that unfolds.
Yes, it'll be interesting.
There you go. This has been, from my perspective, phenomenally helpful and enlightening. So if anybody watching this wants to follow up with you, where would you send them to reach out because they need your services or whatever the case may be?
Sure. I'd be happy to talk to any of your friends. My phone number is 904-398-1419, or they can reach out to me by email. It's just my name, Seth Rothstein @hotmail.com. No dashes, dots, underscores, or anything like that. It's SETHROTHSTEIN @hotmail.com.
Got it. And Matt, anything to close us out here?
No, I just want to say, I want to thank Seth for coming on again. And we had, had a conversation about this yesterday and we were kind of going into it. And I was like, hold that thought. Let's go ahead and put this on video so we can educate other people as well about what's going on. And I'm very appreciative of him hopping on here and sharing just a whole wealth of knowledge that I think people need to understand, because I think we're just kind of seeing the tip of the iceberg right now, because I think this is going to trickle on for another few more months until things really truly get quote unquote normal. And, we figure out what we can and can't do. And that's the whole reason for the conversation. So thank you again, Seth.
Yep. Timely and relevant. We appreciate it. Seth, have a great morning and afternoon. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks so much.
Right.
Bye-bye, guys.
See ya.